Oh, how pleasing are the hymns flowing from a suffering soul. All heaven delights in such a soul, especially when it is tested by God. It mournfully sings out its longing for him. Great is its beauty, because it comes. Oh, how pleasing are the hymns flowing from a suffering soul. All heaven delights in such a soul, especially when it is tested by God. It mournfully sings out its longing for him. Great is its beauty, because it comes from God. The soul walks through the jungle of life, wounded by God's love. With one foot only it touches the ground. When a soul has come out of these tribulations, it is deeply humble. Its purity of soul is great. It knows better without need of reflection, as it were, what it ought to do at a given moment and what to forbear. It feels the slightest touch of grace and is very faithful to God. It recognizes God from afar and continuously rejoices in him. It discovers God very quickly in other souls and in its environment in general. The soul has been purified by God himself. God, as pure spirit, introduces the soul to a life which is purely spiritual. God himself has first prepared and purified the soul, that is, he has made it capable of close communion with himself. The soul, in a state of loving repose, communes spiritually with the Lord. It speaks to God without the need of expressing itself through the senses. God fills it with his life. The enlightened mind sees clearly and distinguishes the various degrees of the spiritual life. It recognizes that state when its union with God was imperfect, where the senses were involved, and the spirit was linked with the senses in a manner exalted and special, to be sure, but not yet perfect. There is a higher and more perfect union with God, namely intellectual union. Here the soul is safer from illusions. Its spirituality is pure and more profound. In a life where the senses are involved, there is more danger of illusion. Both for the soul and for its confessor, prudence must play a greater part. There are moments when God introduces the soul to a purely spiritual state. The senses dim and are seemingly dead. The soul is most closely united to God. It is immersed in the deity. Its knowledge is complete and perfect, not sporadic as before, but total and absolute. It rejoices in this. But I want to say more about those moments of trial. At those times the confessor must have patience with such a soul, but the soul must have even greater patience with itself. My Jesus, you know what my soul goes through at the recollection of these sufferings. I have often marveled that the angels and saints hold their peace at the sight of a soul suffering like that. Yet they have a special love for us at such moments. My soul has often cried out after God, as a little child who cries as loudly as he can when his mother covers her face and he cannot recognize her. O my Jesus, honor and glory to you for these trials of love. Great and incomprehensible is your mercy. All that you intended for my soul, O Lord, is steeped in your mercy. I will mention here that those who live with such a person should not add external sufferings, for indeed, when the soul's cup is full, the little drop we may add to it may be the one drop too much, and a cup of bitterness will overflow. And who will answer for such a soul? Let us beware of adding to the suffering of others, because that is displeasing to the Lord. If the sisters of the superiors knew or even suspected that a soul was suffering such trials, and they nevertheless added still other sufferings, they would be sinning gravely, and God himself would demand an account of them on behalf of such a soul. I am not speaking here of instances which of their very nature are sinful, but of things which in other circumstances would not be sinful. Let us be on our guard against having the weight of such a soul on our conscience. This is a grave and common defect in religious life, namely that when one sees a suffering soul, one always wants to add even more suffering. I do not say that everyone acts like this, but there are some. We take the liberty of passing all sorts of judgments, and we repeat them when we would do better to remain silent. The tongue is a small member, but it does big things. A religious who does not keep silence will never attain holiness. That is, she will never become a saint. Let he not delude herself, unless it is the Spirit of God who is speaking through her, for then she must not keep silence. But in order to hear the voice of God, one has to have silence in one's soul and to keep silence, not a gloomy silence, but an interior silence, that is to say, recollection in God. One can speak a great deal without breaking silence, and, on the contrary, one can speak little and be constantly breaking silence. Oh, what irreparable damage is done by the breach of silence! We cause a lot of harm to our neighbor, but even more to our own selves. In my opinion, and according to my experience, the rule concerning silence should stand in the very first place. God does not give himself to a chattering soul which, like a drone in a beehive, buzzes around but gathers no honey. A talkative soul is empty inside. It lacks both the essential virtues and intimacy with God. A deeper interior life, one of gentle peace and of that silence where the Lord dwells, is quite out of the question. A soul that has never tasted the sweetness of inner silence is a restless spirit which disturbs the silence of others. I have seen many souls in the depths of hell for not having kept their silence. They told me so themselves when I asked them what was the cause of their undoing. These were souls of religious. My God, what an agony it is to think that not only might they have been in heaven, but they might even have become saints. O Jesus, have mercy. I tremble to think that I have to give an account of my tongue. There is life, but there is also death in the tongue. Sometimes we kill with the tongue. We commit real murders, and we are still to regard that as a small thing? I truly do not understand such consciences. I have known a person who, when she learned from someone that a certain thing was being said about her, fell seriously ill. She lost a good deal of blood, and she shed many tears, and the outcome was very sad. It was not the sword that did all this, but the tongue. O my silent Jesus, have mercy on us. I wandered onto the subject of silence, but this is not what I wanted to speak about, but rather about the soul's life with God and about its response to grace. When a soul has been cleansed and the Lord is on intimate terms with it, it begins to apply all its inner force in striving after God. Yet the soul cannot do anything of itself. God alone arranges everything. The soul knows this and is mindful of it. It is still in exile and understands well that there may yet come cloudy and rainy days, but it must now look upon things differently from what it had up to now. It does not seek reassurance in a false peace, but makes ready for battle. It knows it comes from a warrior race. It is now much more aware of everything. It knows that it is of royal stock. It is concerned with all that is great and holy. There is a series of graces which God pours into the soul after these trials by fire. The soul enjoys intimate union with God. It has many visions, both corporeal and intellectual. It hears many supernatural words and sometimes distinct orders. But despite these graces, it is not self-sufficient. In fact, it is even less so as a result of God's graces, because it is now open to many dangers and can easily fall prey to illusions. It ought to ask God for a spiritual director, but not only must it pray for one, it must also make every effort to find a leader who is an expert in these things, just as a military leader must know the ways along which he will lead his followers into battle. A soul that is united with God must be prepared for great and hard-fought battles. After these purifications and tears, God abides in the soul in a special way, but the soul does not always cooperate with these graces. Not that the soul itself is not willing to work, but it encounters so many interior and exterior difficulties that it really takes a miracle to sustain the soul on these summits. In this, it absolutely needs a director. People have often sown doubt in my soul, and I myself have sometimes become frightened at the thought that I was, after all, an ignorant person and did not have knowledge of many things, above all, spiritual things. But when my doubts increased, I sought light from my confessor or my superiors, yet I did not obtain what I desired. When I opened myself up to my superiors, one of them understood my soul and the road God intended for me. When I followed her advice, I made quick progress towards perfection, but this did not last long. When I opened up my soul still more deeply, I did not obtain what I desired. It seemed to my superior that these graces, of which I was the object, were unlikely, and so I could not draw any further help from her. She told me it was impossible that God should commune with his creatures in such a way. I fear for you, sister. Isn't this an illusion of some sort? You'd better go, sister, and talk about these matters with your superiors. And so I would go from the superiors to the confessor, and from the confessor to the superiors, and I found no peace. These divine graces became a great suffering for me, and more than once I said to the Lord directly, Jesus, I am afraid of you. Could you not be some kind of ghost? Jesus always reassured me, but I still continued to be incredulous. It is a strange thing, however. The more I became incredulous, the more Jesus gave me proofs that these things came from him.